Valtteri Bottas is a driver under more pressure than ever. Since joining the Silver Arrows in 2017, he has arguably done his job perfectly, as the Mercedes team have done enough to take the Constructors' Championship in every single season that he's been at the team. But throughout his time at Mercedes, he's had a series of single-season contracts, and once again, his contract is up at the end of the 2021 season. The difference this time, though, is that the Finnish driver's seat has a new competitor in the young gun George Russell, whose 3-year contract with Williams is also up at the end of this season. So what will Mercedes do? And is time running out for Valtteri Bottas at Mercedes? Let's have a look. My name's Andy and this is Behind the Drive. In this video I'm going to be looking at the arguments both for and against keeping Bottas at the team. I'll then determine my opinion on whether Bottas's future could be secured at the Mercedes team, or whether he'll be on the driver market looking for a new drive when the new regulations arrive for 2022. And as always, thank you for hitting the like and subscribe button, and if you haven't already done so, then please do consider it. The case for keeping Bottas. Following Nico Rosberg's retirement at the end of 2016, Valtteri Bottas was brought to the strongest team on the Formula 1 grid. I think it's important to discuss the state of play at Mercedes before the Finnish driver's arrival. With Rosberg and Hamilton, the team had two of the best drivers on the grid at the time who shared one of the most bitter rivalries in Formula 1 history. Toto Wolff has recently spoken about his thoughts on this pairing during his interview on the High Performance podcast. He said that having both Rosberg and Hamilton at the team together was a destructive force, as opposed to the hostility between the two bringing out the best in each of them individually. However, the two drivers were recruited before Toto Wolff was brought into the team, and as a result it was very difficult for him to change the driver lineup. The history between Rosberg and Hamilton goes all the way back to 2000, where the pair were teammates in their karting days, so it's safe to say that the volatility between the two is likely to be unparalleled with any other driver pairing. But it's also important to look at the fact that Toto Wolff was not happy with the fiery relationship between the two drivers before bringing Bottas into the team. He even talked about the fact that as a result of what he called selfish behaviour, he was close to intervening between the two drivers to make them miss races, if necessary. So with Nico Rosberg's retirement, Toto Wolff had an opportunity to choose a driver pairing that would restore the peace within the team. He went with Valtteri Bottas, a driver that had achieved an impressive 9 podium finishes with the Williams team and had put his name on the map during his first 3 seasons of the turbo hybrid era. Not only this, but Bottas also had been managed by Toto Wolff in the past, so Wolff knew the type of driver that he'd be working with by bringing this driver to the team. Moving into the 2017 season, the Ferrari team had a bit of a resurgence to provide stronger competition to the Mercedes team ahead of them. So for the first time in the turbo hybrid era, a non-Mercedes driver was taking the fight to Lewis Hamilton to challenge for the title, as Sebastian Vettel achieved 5 wins across the season. He was even leading the championship at the mid-season point. Now in terms of Bottas's role, he was out to ensure that the Mercedes team won the Constructors' Championship, and where necessary, to provide support to Lewis Hamilton to put the pressure on whoever's competing with him in the Drivers' Championship, so in this case, Sebastian Vettel. He did this incredibly well, taking 13 podiums across the 20-race season with 3 wins to his name, and he ended up 3rd in the Drivers' Championship. But I would say that for his first season with the Silver Arrows, he'd done exactly what was expected of him. Over the course of 2018 though, Bottas struggled as he ended up in 5th in the standings without a race win. Although it is worth noting here that he would have taken a win if it wasn't for team orders in Russia, and he could have taken the win in Germany as well, if it wasn't for the team asking him not to overtake Hamilton. So a disappointing season, but he had done enough to ensure that his place at the team was secured, although arguably the main reason for this was the fact that there weren't any other drivers set to take his seat from within the Mercedes Young Driver programme, other than perhaps Esteban Ocon, who was deemed not ready to move up to the team following his 2 seasons of Force India. So the positives here must be the fact that Bottas had done enough to deliver a Constructors' Championship for the team, and the fact that he'd done enough to support Lewis Hamilton's Drivers' Championship bid to ensure the British driver took that trophy as well. Moving into 2019 and 2020, Bottas achieved 2nd in the championship on both occasions, as the team produced a dominant car. So once again, the Finn clearly did exactly what the team needed him to do. We've seen times in the past where having 2 teammates that are so close during the championship can actually cost them the Drivers' Championship. For example, back in 2007, McLaren would have won the Constructors' Championship if it wasn't for the Spygate scandal. But both Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso ended up 1 point behind the eventual champion, Kimi Raikkonen, at the end of the season. Now granted, this situation doesn't happen often, but when you have a close championship fight with a rival team, and your own drivers are tripping each other up and costing each other points, it may result in the team shooting themselves in the foot. So this is where Valtteri Bottas has perhaps been one of the best number 2 drivers of all time. He's delivered for the team without stepping on Hamilton's toes, as Rosberg was doing during his time in that seat. Had Mercedes have had a realistic challenge during the Hamilton-Rosberg era, the situation could have happened, which is perhaps why Toto Wolff didn't want a driver pairing like this again in the future. So it's not a bad place for Bottas to be. He's done everything that he's needed to do for Mercedes and contributed to the championship success each season, whilst taking a few wins along the way. A pretty compelling argument for keeping Bottas at the team for next season. The case for dropping Bottas. So we've seen the case for keeping Bottas, but we also need to address the case for dropping Valtteri Bottas for the 2022 season. Now there are a couple of perspectives to look at here. For starters, you have the factors that may encourage Mercedes to look elsewhere, which I'll call the push factors. And then you have the other elephant in the room, or the pull factor, which is George Russell, the young Mercedes driver that's available at the team to promote if they choose to. Let's start by looking at the push factors. First up, I want to have another look at 2018. I've already mentioned that Bottas could have had at least 1 and potentially 2 wins over the course of that year, and taking these into account, he could have easily jumped to 3rd in the championship. But fundamentally, he was a step behind both Hamilton and Vettel during that season, and he had a car that was clearly capable of more. So I think you can look at 2018 as a bit of a blot on his record at Mercedes. Then I also want to have a quick look at the 3 races we've seen so far in 2021. On a couple of occasions now, we've seen Toto Wolff making a rare appearance on the team radio, encouraging Valtteri Bottas to push and get closer to Verstappen ahead of him. Wolff is demanding more and more of Bottas at the moment because he knows that where possible, he needs Bottas to take points away from Verstappen and Red Bull. It's an interesting one as you don't see the same approach for Lewis, and it isn't something that I've seen much from Toto Wolff in the past. But other than those 2 points, it's difficult to fault Bottas from a Mercedes performance perspective over his 4 full seasons at the team. Sure, you could say that he never mounted a challenge for the title, and from a fan's point of view that's quite frustrating, especially when you have a single team dominating the championship. But to determine whether time is running out for Valtteri, we need to think about this from a Mercedes perspective here, and particularly over the last couple of years, Bottas has been there to take a few wins on merit over the course of each season and make sure that the team take home the championship. And then you have the pull factors, which is predominantly in the form of an informed George Russell. Now it can be said that Russell is the future of the Mercedes team. He's the 2018 Formula 2 champion and has made a big impression on the sport since joining in 2019. During his time at Williams, he's yet to score a point, but his ability to outperform his teammate, particularly on a Saturday, has been pretty much flawless. He's been taking that Williams car to positions it simply doesn't belong on a Saturday, and as a result he's made a positive impression, which is a great achievement as other drivers that have started with backmarker teams have tended to take a few points to get onto people's radars. Now this has absolutely come with challenges at the same time. Russell's time at Williams has not been without a few mistakes on Sundays. There was Imola in 2020 where he crashed out behind the safety car whilst running inside the points. The 2020 Styrian Grand Prix, where he failed to capitalise on a good qualifying as he started the race in 11th and threw it away early on in tricky conditions. And then finally, you have the 2021 Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix, where he hit Bottas's Mercedes to take them both out of the race when they were running in the points. This incident though was the crucial one, and there are a few ways to look at it. For starters, you can say it was a mistake from Russell, as he showed his inexperience by going for a move and not keeping his car on track during it. You then have the argument of looking at it from that perspective of the famous Ayrton Senna quote of, if you no longer go for a gap that exists, you are no longer a racing driver. But on reflection, I think that my view is that it's a racing incident, as the stewards determined. But that isn't the issue here, as my biggest concern is how the situation appeared where George Russell in a Williams was competing with and lining up an overtake against Valtteri Bottas in a Mercedes. Quite literally from one end of the grid to the other, and the slower car was the one making the move. Now yes, the tyres were challenging to manage at the race due to the tricky conditions, but for me that isn't an excuse for a car that was capable of achieving pole position the day before. To be competing with a Williams for 8th in the race is pretty shocking. Not only this, but if it wasn't for Hamilton's mistake on the same lap, Lewis would have been looking to lap Bottas pretty soon after. So not exactly a great position for Bottas to be in, and not exactly up there supporting Hamilton on this occasion. Then you also have the Sakir Grand Prix last year, where Russell was drafted into the team following Hamilton's COVID diagnosis. Coming into the team with almost no notice, Russell immediately got up to speed, driving with shoes a size too small so he could fit into his car. The team advised him not to learn and use the DAS system on their car as it would reduce the amount of learning that he'd be expected to do, but he refused and picked it up within FP1. So all of these points were helping Russell to make his mark. And when it came to it with the competitive sessions, he qualified just behind Valtteri Bottas in second, losing out by 0.02 of a second. And then on Sunday, Russell made an impressive start to take the lead of the Grand Prix and looked to be in a position to comfortably take the victory until a botched pit stop and a slow puncher towards the end of the race dropped him back down the order. It was a stellar weekend from the driver and was a unique opportunity for the young gun to prove his worth and have a trial race to show what he's capable of. And he did all of this with just 3 practice sessions in that car. He didn't end up taking the win that he deserved that weekend, but for me, he made his mark, and I think a lot of people realised what he was capable of achieving. Now, after these impressive performances for the 23-year-old driver, I'm sure Mercedes are happy he's on their books and part of their driver academy. But at the same time, I can guarantee that his performances will have attracted the attention of other top teams, and although McLaren, Ferrari and Red Bull all have strong driver lineups at the moment that they probably won't want to change anytime soon, I think the opportunity to bring Russell in is probably something that they would be silly not to consider, which is another pull factor for the Mercedes team as they want to prevent their future star from ending up elsewhere. So the pull factors are perhaps stronger than the push factors, but I think there's quite a big argument to be made to say that Bottas' time is running out at Mercedes. 2021, so far at least, is the biggest test for the Mercedes team, as they're up against a Red Bull car that's already proven that it's capable of achieving race wins and pole positions. So it's all the more important to have a strong driver in that second Mercedes seat. My opinion. So we've seen both arguments for and against keeping Bottas at the Mercedes team for 2022, but I now want to address what I think on the matter. I think the key trigger for the move, and the element that I've not mentioned already, is in the hands of Lewis Hamilton. If Hamilton chooses to retire, then it makes sense to promote George Russell into that seat, although having Bottas and Russell at the same team would be a significantly weakened driver lineup in my opinion, given Russell's experience compared to the 7-time champion. However, Hamilton has said recently at the Portuguese Grand Prix press conferences that he intends on being on the grid next season, so I think that the prospect of a Russell-Bottas partnership is quite unlikely. So then we have to address whether bringing George Russell into the team to partner Lewis Hamilton is a better move than keeping the status quo of Hamilton-Bottas for the new 2022 regulations. And I think that in an ideal world, Toto would want to keep both drivers for the 6th season in a row, to manage that transition between now and the new regulations. However, it's that last pull factor, the risk of losing Russell to another top team, that I think will mean something needs to be done at the end of this year. So personally, I think it's more likely that they would make the switch to bring in George Russell for 2022 to give him an opportunity to learn from Lewis Hamilton. You could argue that Russell may step on Hamilton's toes and not be quite such a supportive driver as Valtteri Bottas is today, and that's probably the case. But I think certainly early on, Russell will continue his development as a driver and learn from Lewis, to then be in a position to step up into that lead driver role in the next few years once Lewis Hamilton retires. Now you could also argue that Toto Wolff wouldn't want to do this based on his thoughts on the Hamilton-Rosberg partnership, but I would say that that's a very different situation. There's less history between Hamilton and Russell and less friction. They're also at completely different stages in their career, and it's probably about the right time for the team to have a bit of a changing of the guard to allow Russell to be their top driver in the new generation, to compete with the likes of Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc. And there's also an alternative option. Currently another Mercedes-backed driver, Esteban Ocon, is racing at Alpine, a team a bit further up the grid than Williams. So perhaps a stopgap could be put in place to allow the Mercedes team to keep their current driver lineup for 2022 and allow George Russell to take a step up the grid at the same time. It's unlikely, but not impossible. But my view is that time will be up for Valtteri Bottas come the end of the 2021 season, for all of the reasons that I've stated. This is, of course, unless he manages to have an impressive season for the Silver Arrows this year, but based on the first 3 rounds, it doesn't look too likely. As for whether he comes back to the team after Lewis retires, well, that's another question entirely. But for now, I think time's running out for the Finnish driver at Mercedes. So that's my view on Bottas' time at Mercedes. What's yours? Let me know in the comments, and if you've enjoyed this video and watched this far, then please consider leaving the video a like and subscribing to Behind the Drive for more videos just like this one in the future.